other one, 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, they're all red. 2,
Where's the play mark? Where's the play mark?
Voted for 3 Republicans. One of them was Susanna Martinez.
Obama.
Yeah!
Steve got the votes because they all work in the oil field. And wants to keep the jobs and
I'm actually running for state representative.
Nevada on the Bundys, or what really happened concerning the murder of rancher Lavoy Finicum in Oregon, and the 30-plus people who are now being held in prison, some in solitary confinement by the federal government without due process. And now, after the execution of Lavoy Finicum, the FBI, and I have this from a very reliable source, has been setting up checkpoints around the same area with armored vehicles and snipers, stopping people. For example, a young family with 2 children made the parents get out of the vehicle, leave the children in the vehicle, and walk backwards away from the vehicle to the checkpoint area, all the while the snipers had their lasers pointed at these people's chests. These are innocent people driving down the highway. An elderly couple was stopped at the checkpoint. The gentleman had difficulty walking forward, much less walking backward, but they insisted that they walk backward from their vehicle to the checkpoint while the snipers had their rifles with lasers pointed on them. Is this our free country? The United States of America? This is happening here? Really? Joe Robertson, the 77-year-old disabled Navy veteran, has been sentenced to 18 months in prison, hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines for building a stock pond on his private property. They have convicted him and sent him to prison for 18 months. 77-year-old disabled Navy veteran. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you, who are the real criminals here?
Feds.
He even has documentation, an environmental impact statement that was specific to his case, showed no violations, no pollution to the tributaries running from the ponds to the Jefferson River, which is 60 miles away. There are no tributaries running from those stock ponds. They are self-contained. Our founders knew what it was like to be subjects of tyranny and oppression. We are beginning to see that again now, ladies and gentlemen. Thomas Jefferson said, "When the government fears the people, there is liberty. When the people fear the government, there is tyranny." A little closer to home, some of you may be aware of the Goss family ranch in Caldcroft. The Forest Service has put up an electric fence fencing off their livestock from their privately owned water rights and forage on their ranch, all to protect a meadow jumping mouse that nobody seems to be able to find. Interesting. Federal overreach affects more than just ranchers and farmers, folks. All producers that work hard, make huge investments, and provide food and fiber and other products that we all enjoy are affected. Nearly every one of us is affected by our overgrown and out-of-control federal government. Schools and education, small businesses, health insurance and medical care, our veterans' health care and other services, and more. All of the issues should be handled either at the state level or at the local level, or left to each individual and family. 98% of current federal agencies are not even authorized by the U.S. Constitution and were never the purpose of the federal government in the first place. Our ancestors fought against the oppression and tyranny that we are experiencing today in America. Many died fighting for the liberty that we are now losing. Many more sacrificed their fortunes, their property, their health, and some lost their families, their liberty, because they knew it was worth it. Our founders set up the greatest, most successful form of government in the history of the world, right here in the United States of America. The federal government is a far cry from what it was originally and what our founders intended. But it's not too late yet. Each of us can help restore our constitutional representative republic. And I will remind you, we all need to learn our Constitution. It is the supreme law of the land. Let's look at the 9th Amendment. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. The 10th Amendment. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states and respectively to the people. Let's all do our part, folks, and stand for liberty. This mic is open. I'm going to turn it over to Sheriff Scott London first. He's got a message for us. Then if anyone else wants to speak, feel free. We would like to keep it respectful, productive. We don't want to bash any particular party or candidate. This is not what we're here for. We are here for the United States of America and our freedom under the Constitution. Thank you. Scott London.
Thank you, Tina. You know, I stand here today and I want to let you know, first of all, I don't really hold a grudge against the individuals that work for our local BLM office. Most of those people are just people that wanted a job. They found a good paying job with good benefits and they took a job. My issue is more with the bureaucracy that they are employed by. U.S. Senator Martin Heinrich, our senator from New Mexico, wrote an op-ed that came out in the New York Times back in October 2014 titled "The Land Grab Out West." In summary, Senator Heinrich believes that the federal government can run public lands better than state governments. I recently had a conversation with one of my constituents that said, you know, I suspect that state government can mismanage lands equally as poorly as the federal government. The difference would be that the money would at least stay locally rather than go off to other states or even overseas. Now, while I understand and sympathize with that sentiment, I would argue that if it were managed locally, we would have a lot closer access to the executive management than we do with those that are working in D.C. This highlights another issue. Our legislators have passed the buck by creating executive entities like the EPA and BLM that make their own regulations, enforce their own regulations, and adjudicate their own regulations. To heck with separation of powers. They put it all in one. Now, why would our legislators do that? It has relieved them of any obligation of doing their job, because now these executive entities can come up with their own regulations. So they're not the bad guys now, and when you go to them and complain, they can now be the hero by fixing the problem. Our legislators need to own up to their responsibilities and start passing the laws rather than passing the buck to the executive branch to legislate their own regulations. But now back to the article. In it, Senator Heinrich refers to the campaign to transfer to the states or even sell off shared lands. Now, none of the legislative efforts to transfer public lands are to turn over to the highest bidder our public lands into private hands. That is a baseless scare tactic to build opposition to the transfer of public lands to state governments. Senator Heinrich goes on to say that the states are inept at managing public lands located in our own backyards. Objectionably, he states, proponents argue that states are better equipped to manage the West's natural resources and wonders than the United States Federal Forest Service and other national land management agencies. Senator Heinrich wants us to believe that Big Brother knows best. I might remind you that Ronald Reagan once said the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Let us not forget the control burn that nearly destroyed Los Alamos, New Mexico in May of 2000. That Rio Grande fire was estimated to cost nearly $1 billion in damages. It might also be mentioned that in September 2011, federal agents threatened to arrest Congressman Steve Pierce and Otero County officials for cutting and thinning trees in the Lincoln National Forest to prevent such a forest fire in their own county. Finally, Senator Heinrich misleads readers by stating the cost of managing these lands would bankrupt state governments. Does he not realize that if states were in control of those lands, they would receive the same revenue through grazing leases, mining permits, oil and gas permits that the federal government does? We would simply be cutting out the middleman and thinning the linings of the federal government's pockets. And thus we see the reason for the Fed's opposition. Remember, it's always about the money. The only way states could foot the bill would be to raise taxes or sell large expanses or leases to developers and other private interests, including oil and gas, timber, and mining companies, he stated. He's accusing states of being required to do the exact same thing that the federal government is doing right now. Do you have any idea how much money was made off of oil and gas permits issued by the BLM right here in New Mexico just 2 years ago? How much revenue has been generated by the federal government out of your public lands right here in New Mexico? In Utah, the Utah Public Lands Policy Coordinating Office commissioned 3 separate universities to conduct a study on the feasibility of state controlling currently federally controlled lands. It is absolutely feasible. There would likely be some growing pains in the transition, which might take a couple of years. But in the long run, it is not only possible, but it is in the state's best interest to transfer control of public lands from the federal government to the states. Utah has actually already passed legislation demanding that the federal government turn over federally controlled land to the states. Time will tell how well your federal government listens to we the people. Now, thus far, I've only talked about the practical side of state-managed public lands. But what about the legal side of things? The Constitution of the United States of America has no provision for the federal government managing public lands. As a matter of fact, according to Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 17, the federal government may purchase land with consent of the state for the purposes of erection of forts, that would be your military bases, magazines, which are storage facilities, arsenals, which is storage of armament and military equipment, dockyards, which is ports of entry, and other meaningful buildings, in other words, offices. You look out on our BLM land, how many offices do they have out there? There is absolutely no provision for the federal government to be a caretaker, much less a beneficiary of the profits off of your public lands. Now, on a personal note, Senator Heinrich did end the article with a faux pas that happens to be one of my personal pet peeves. He described the United States as being, he talks about all this being part of the fabric of our democracy. Now, I suspect, I'm preaching to the choir here, what form of government do we have here?
Republic.
A republic. And if you ever want to remind yourself of what kind it is, all you have to do is remember the Pledge of Allegiance. And to the what? Republic for which it stands. That's right. For a little over 200 years now, the United States of America has been a republic, not a democracy. But I digress. So what can we do? How can we make some changes? First, we must elect officials who are willing to learn the Constitution or know the Constitution and exercise that knowledge. Start local. And I can tell you right now, when I was campaigning for sheriff, I'm a little disappointed in myself to say that I had not read the actual Declaration of Independence until one of my supporters handed me a little book just like this. But I at least had a willingness to read it. I've since read it, and I've become a bit of a scholar, if you will, of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. As a matter of fact, every one of my deputies, every person that I swear in receives one of these pocket versions of the Constitution. You want to see one of my deputies and challenge them? Feel free. Go up and ask them, where's your pocket Constitution that the sheriff gave you? So we must start local with our county commissioners, our city council, our mayors, and our sheriffs. And then take it to the state level and elect representatives and state senators that go to our state capital in Santa Fe. And the governor, kind of like the Utah governor, Gary Herbert, and Utah legislators like Representative Ken Ivory, who have spearheaded the legislation in Utah to demand the federal government to turn land back over to the states. Which, by the way, even if those states did want to sell off those lands into private hands, that would actually be in line with our founding fathers. If you look at anything in the eastern half of the United States, most of the land is private. Why is that? Because the founders believed that private citizens knew better how to manage land than the government did. You look at the Northwest Ordinance when Michigan was out west, they wanted to sell off as much land as possible and get it in the hands of private citizens. But now one last thing I want to mention is, how do you know that the person you're electing believes in the Constitution? We must first educate ourselves. Chris Ann Hall has been to our community more than once to help educate us on what the Constitution means. Now, if you weren't able to attend that, guess what? Hillsdale College offers a free online course called Constitution 101. I've completed that course. I'm actually on to the next one. I would encourage each one of you, sit down and it's at your own pace and learn what it was that our founding fathers wanted out of our government. Learn what it was that the Constitution meant for us right here, and learn how we can apply it to today. I personally believe that the Constitution is not supposed to be a living document, but a guideline for how our government should be operating today. Unfortunately, we have missed the mark. There have been several changes that have started since the 1920s in our government, and we are unfortunately reaping some of the sour seeds of those efforts. We need to get back to where we started, get back to the U.S. Constitution, and get our government back on track. Thank you for inviting me, Tina, and thank you all for coming out.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we do have some information here for you today. We've got pocket constitutions. We've got brochures that talk about the Stand By Me for Liberty organization and what we're doing in that organization. And I've also got some copies of Chris Ann Hall's flyers from her little video that she has on Facebook and on her website. You go listen to that, and then she will furnish you with this particular flyer. One's on the First Amendment, one's on the Second Amendment, and one's on the Fourth Amendment. Those are all very important amendments that you need to be aware of, learn about, and be able to defend. If we don't know what our rights are under the Constitution, how are we going to defend them? How are we going to fight for them? So let's all get together, let's learn together, let's stand for liberty together.
Certainly.